Hello everyone, I'm High Treason, and I forgot what game I was going to look at, or it might have been a cartoon or something. So I'll have to do that later, and we'll just do another computer overview video for now. Now I'm in a bad mood, and I'm kind of on limited time, because I've been very, very busy just like isn't everyone this time of year. And I'm in a bad mood because of Twitch, in case you're wondering why that is, but you'll hear more about that later. Now, the machine we're going to look at, it's probably going to get dismantled, or at least heavily modified, but it does have some historical significance, which I'm sure you'll figure out as time goes on. Anyway, let's just have a look at the bloody thing, because I just want to get on with this, so I can, get on with putting it away and not have to look at it anymore. Before I start this, don't get me wrong, this is far from the worst machine I've ever used. It's not that bad. It's just a bit quirky. Anyway, this is Tanya. It's oddly the first system I've named after a black woman, although the 386 was as well. It didn't get named until after this was built. This thing was built to replace the failed 586, and it uses quite a lot of the same parts. It lives in the tiny case, as I have no remaining AT Factor machines to build, aside from one awaiting completion. It lives in this ATX case. That wasn't really uncommon for a machine of its era, so it doesn't seem wrong to do that, but we'll talk about that one another time. This AT machine is running an Intel Pentium 60MHz processor, model AB0501-60 SX974, though you're seeing an SX948, which looks pretty much the same. This all makes me wonder if I was missold this from an otherwise reputable seller. I paid over the odds for the board, RAM and CPU, so I was quite pissed. Reason being, I was sold this as being the first model of Pentium. Now if you want to be a technical dick, that's likely the AB0500-50, which ran at 50MHz and was only available as an engineering sample. I don't have a photo of one, nor do I own one, but someone might if you want to Google it. I didn't expect that model, as those sell for four-figure numbers and wouldn't likely appear stuck to a motherboard that didn't support it, given that it only supports 60 and 66MHz. What I did expect was an earlier model. The early models have an FDiv bug, or floating point division bug. In short, you can test it with software like PC Check or PentNT from Windows NT, but otherwise you can open the calculator and type 4195835 divided by 314 Keen's IQ 5727, which should be 1.333820, and so on. As you see, it is, so this chip does not have the FDiv bug. Another giveaway is the fact the CPU has a gold heat spreader installed between it and the heatsink. The really early chips usually did not. These were added somewhat later, as early Pentiums tend to run very hot, being 5 volts, which is a bit backwards. These Pentiums live in socket 4, later models live in socket 5 and 7. Socket 7's introduction of dual rail was a big factor in reducing the heat output, as it allowed for lower power consumption. And whilst we're on this tangent, I don't own any socket 5 motherboards, because you can plug a socket 5 chip into a socket 7 and it'll work, just like that Pentium 75 there. It just lacks a pin for the second power rail required by socket 7 chips, so you can't do it the other way around. Otherwise though, they're electrically the same. Socket 4, on the other hand, is a big bulky socket, as well as being Intel's last PC processor to use a plain PGA, or pin grid array. The later sockets were an SPGA, staggered pin grid array, and I suspect it may be possible to insert the CPU the wrong way and fry it, unless there's an extra pin I'm not aware of. To be honest, it wouldn't do much harm to this particular machine's functionality. It's probably worth more as scrap gold anyway. The motherboard's made by Intel. They named it Batman, or Batman's Revenge, apparently. Should have called it Superman, given AMD's kryptonite. I think Batman sucks, and he looks like he just got done with a gay S&M parade. Not that there's anything wrong with either of those things, but there's a time and a place, dude, come on. As for the motherboard, it's a full-size AT board, quite a contrast from those late model 486 boards, eh? The cache is on board, and is handled by the Intel Mercury chipset. The Mercury chipset is a piece of shit. The L2 cache is glued to the motherboard, and can't be changed. Don't ask me how much. 256k I expect, It does support a bit more than that, the chipset, though. It makes no difference anyway. That chipset's slower than fucking hell. And that is slow, because you can't physically fuck hell. Well, maybe you could drill a hole in it somewhere, and you know, where am I going with this? To make matters even worse, mine's paired with an RZ1000 IDE controller, which is known for causing data corruption. Possibly why the Leo hard drive ended up with a corrupted file allocation table during the making of that video. Anyone notice that was taken with two different sets of programs installed under Windows? Yeah, the hard drive was set up in this machine for it. Yeah, it generally doesn't work properly, this IDE controller, so ignore what I've done here if you want to use one. Don't even try to use a hard drive larger than 504 megabytes. But I'll explain further when I get to the BIOS. The chipset does not support EDO and is one of those which is quite picky about what fast page DRAM it'll take. It came with 16 megabytes installed, and due to really horrible performance, I've installed an additional 16 megabytes, bringing it to 32. Oddly, that's been in a drawer for 10 years with a CPU with the same spec, the one you saw earlier. I guess that was a common combination then. That came from an AST machine that died on a friend I had back then, as far as I remember. If you're watching this, Andy, can I have my Acer 486 back, you dick? Yeah, I left him repairing a 486 of mine, and I never saw him or the machine ever again. Anyway, it detects that RAM, but it makes no difference. In fact, I think it made it worse. I dread to think what might happen if you installed the proposed maximum of 128 megabytes. Apparently the Mercury, is it named after Freddie Mercury, can support 192 megabytes on some boards, which I imagine is even worse. And why is this RAM slot different to the others? What makes him so special? The layout on this board sucks. I did try replacing the RAM entirely, in case it was faulty, but that was a no-go. The motherboard sometimes reads the amount incorrectly in post as well, so gotta watch out for that. The chipset, like everything else, runs very hot. Not as hot as the battery mod on the Dallas clock chip there, though. I don't know who did that, but dude, you're a bit of an idiot. Power's supplied to the battery when the system's powered on, and the battery gets hot, because it's not supposed to be recharged. I assume the seller did this mod. Were you too tight-fisted selling it so far overpriced that you couldn't afford 10 euro cents for a diode? Here is a power connector I don't use. Its job is to supply 3.3 volts to somewhere. It seems unneeded as supplying it changes nothing. I assume it's for 3.3 volt PCI cards, which I don't have installed. It's not like the Pentium 3s where it's for the CPU, because those are 5 volt in here. You might notice on the camera that the machine causes a lot of EMI whilst operating. This is one of the only shots I took whilst the machine was running. You may have noticed this serial card. It's on loan from my 286 because the onboard headers don't work. I use it to run the mouse, but it becomes unresponsive when the CPU's under any amount of load. And I mean any amount, upwards of 25%. Well, that and the BIOS likes to turn the onboard headers back on, at random, causing conflicts and crashing the machine. This machine really likes crashing, it's one of its favourite pastimes. I'm inclined to think Gateway used this model of motherboard, and it would explain some of the problems if that's where it's from. OEM machines are usually underpowered or barely spec, in my experience. I mean, I've worked on an Acer Aspire once that ran an Athlon XP under a 180 watt power supply. Yeah, great idea there. The BIOS chip can't be changed either. Again, more on that soon. Here's my S3 Trio 32. It runs faster than the Trio 64 in here. The only things faster, really, are the Trio 64V Plus and a Seng ET6000, which is overpriced and needless. This S3 has 1 megabyte of RAM on board. It used to live in the K5 until that got upgraded to a fast Verge, but we discussed that in the updated systems video. Ethernet connectivity is provided by this card. It's a 3COM 3C905, it's an early model of it. They're generally my standard PCI Ethernet card. Not much to say about the Ethernet card besides it works and is common as muck, which is usually good as you can find drivers for those ones quite easily. My Pro Audio Spectrum Plus ended up in here and I really like this card. Did you know that there are 2 digital audio devices on board? One exclusive to the Pro Audio Spectrum and the other emulating a Sound Blaster Pro. Both can be used at once, though I don't actually know of any software that makes use of this capability. The thing is, this card would beat a real Sound Blaster Pro into a pulp quite easily. It also has a SCSI controller on board, which was designed for CD-ROM drives, but with the correct Trant or SCSI drivers, it's said other devices will function as well. MediaVision showed a lot of potential in the 1990s. They might have been the only company that could take on Creative Labs once Advanced Gravis began fading out. The problem is they tended to cheat financially, and as such, things led to the company going bust, and as a result of the longest running financial scandal ever in Silicon Valley, they faded away too. They did re-emerge as Oriel Semiconductor for some time though, and that Yamaha MU90R I have has Oriel Exciter technology, apparently, which sounds a bit like something a woman might pleasure herself with. But ultimately they got sued for patent infringement by Creative Labs, and despite winning, they couldn't afford the legal costs and disappeared, which was probably Creative's plan all along. A last note on the hardware is that the card does use a Yamaha YMF262 FM synthesizer chip, same one that the Sound Blaster Pro 2, 16 and OR cards use, though the stereo usually works on this one, as we will hear shortly. There's a Quantum hard drive installed. It's overkill because it's 6 gig, and I'm running out of drives on there completing my collection. I don't want to buy any more. The CF adapter from the 586 went over to the 386. It's one of a few upgrades I've got planned for that machine. A Panasonic IDE CD-ROM drive is also installed. I wanted to play old adventure games and stuff on this machine, as some run unusually on faster machines and they don't run well on my existing 486s for some reason. In the case of the Hooker, it's mainly because the hard drive just isn't big enough. It's only 500 meg. And otherwise, the Hooker is evolving into something faster. I've got a feeling we might be seeing that machine again next year, as the motherboard's finally dying out, and I'm going to have to throw money and not cigarettes at parts for it. Let's make it the machine it could have been, because I think it really deserves it. It's been good to me, that one. This piece of junk, on the other hand, was ironically expensive, not just to me, but to its first owner. You see, the parts are probably about the same age, so I don't think it's unfair to compare them. You'd think you'd get better performance with high quality parts like this, but that's not the case. Here we have the BIOS, and I can say without any doubt in the world that aside from IBM's Value Point, this is the worst BIOS I've ever encountered. In fact, it is worse than Value Point, because at least that did what it was supposed to do. It just did it in a roundabout way, because IBM are assholes. It is among the first, if not the first, plug-and-play capable BIOS in the world, but it's fucking awful. Hard drives are not detected in any logical order. The IDE controller just decides where they are by drive lettering here. And you're screwed if you think you're going to run logical block addressing. Not going to happen. This drive is supposed to use that, but I have to use extended CHS because enabling LBA does one of two things. Failure to complete post because it'll freeze, or else it just causes a checksum error. It isn't my Quantum. I tried quite a few different drives. The LBA support's just broken. Yeah, no shit, it's not going to boot from here now. No, it's a lack of beep. You can't change anything in the BIOS really. No memory timings, cache or anything. Not a single useful setting. Once turn on plug and play, yeah, don't, because it won't boot with that enabled. Turn that shit off and unassign every IRQ, despite knowing where they are if you want to start the machine. Incidentally, it has moments where it can't read floppies, which I suspect is related to the BIOS, as it seems to only happen when certain options are played with. Oh, and if you leave it on the command prompt too long, or sometimes when starting a program, you just get errors thrown at you. Yeah, real nice. I'd be willing to put money on that not being meant to happen. I was just trying to start Windows. Oh well. Yeah, that makes up for the FDiv bug. We won't spend long on the software because it doesn't do much. Realms of the Haunting requires a 486DX266 machine, which was something of the baseline lowest common denominator back then. Although it does recommend a Pentium. I actually completed the game for the first time ever on this machine, but it doesn't run that well most of the time, preferring to slow down. Dark Forces will run on practically anything, and that works on here. The only reason I started this was to show you the stereo FM synthesis of the PAS. Yeah, that's not half bad, is it? And Duke Nukem 3D doesn't support stereo FM synth because it uses the same plain old mono ad-lib driver for all FM chip cards. No problem really, it's not playable on this machine anyway. 3D Realms tested the game on a 486DX266. Again, it was a bit of a baseline, that thing, intending it to be playable. But shit, we saw Leo do it with half the amount of RAM this thing has, weaker graphics card and no L2 cache, though it did have the 486 chip that was recommended. Compare it to this machine and there's a clear winner. There's no escaping, it runs like shit on this thing. Duke Nukem 3D, just about playable. I haven't tested it extensively, and Realms of the Haunting would work, I expect, except we don't actually have a CD-ROM drive. Well, the machine's getting quite hot, we'd better turn it off for a while. Those batteries have mercury in them, apparently, and I don't want that going all over my expansion cards. Fuck the motherboard and CPU, though, those can die in a fire for all I care. As a final insult, the hooker, now running a 40MHz UMC processor, can almost catch up. Yeah, you just saw a cheap cigarette-smoking, binge-drinking, heroin-addled, yeast-infected 486SX compare itself to a Pentium. Now, I could be wrong, but I suspect the Pentium might be at fault here. As a final note on Duke 3D, I found out that tampering with memory and the screen resolutions work to some extent. You can see from the pixelation we're actually running at a very low resolution here, lower than the SX was. Really fast here, but yeah, notice sometimes it goes too fast. It seems very inconsistent, like the timer's going nuts, a bit like Lame Duke does sometimes. Of course, that isn't as simple as that with this machine, because as you notice when we enter the cinema here, the game actually slows down and threatens to lock up again, so very, very inconsistent. It just gets worse, if anything. Well, whilst we did that, the machine got cooled down. Even my cards run hot in here, making me wonder if something's wrong with the power supply. Not as in the power supply itself, which tests out fine on my multimeter, but with the electronics on the motherboard, used to regulate and distribute the power to other components. You can't run an SSI on here, because it crashes regardless of command line parameters. This is due to a bug in the plug and play BIOS, whether it's enabled or not, as far as I'm aware. Top bench is questionable on this one. There's less than 220 points, which is kind of where I'd expect it to be, at about 220, slightly higher. Keep in mind that the 486SX40 is getting 205, and that kind of puts it into perspective, doesn't it? You can see my 100MHz 486DX4 is around the same speed as this machine. That thing has really slow memory timings, and this Pentium does come into its own more in 32-bit code. Apparently that's what the Pentiums were really designed to do, and the Pentium 75 I used to compare to the 586 isn't much faster than this, being only slightly north of 220 points. But do remember, the 586 only got 207, and that'll give you an idea of how bad the Alpina and Biostar boards were until certain things were tweaked. Keep in mind that Pentium 75 as well. It was set up to represent an average lowest common denominator Pentium 75 with relatively slow timings and cache, which wasn't even in pipeline burst mode. It can run considerably faster if you tamper with those settings, and it is in a motherboard whose memory control is known to be faulty. To add even further insult to injury, the hooker's going balls to the wall. Well, hang on a minute, it doesn't have balls. What's the female equivalent? Well, okay, whatever that is, to the wall trying to hit 300 points. I doubt it will get there, but 273 is quite fast when you consider what hardware it's had to use to get there with. It's not even using VLB video cards, and there's no PCI, and PCI cards usually offer a significant boost. It's done well. Thing is, I don't believe the 32-bit advantage has been seen, because games like Duke Nukem 3D and Realms of the Haunting make use of 32-bit code. In Duke 3D it's mostly for level geometry and coordinates. Doom not so much. That's 20 years old now, by the way, and Carmack recently left it. The Doom runs quite well. I can time Demo 3 in Quake when it runs without locking up, and it actually isn't that bad. I didn't want to run games as late as Quake on here, nor did I really want to run Duke 3D, but something just feels off. I mean, I only really used them for testing. If I show you how sluggish it can be, you might understand, such as getting Windows up can sometimes take minutes, and then you get a sudden burst of speed. Shutting Windows down is similar, leaving you on this blinking dot for long periods of time, and then eventually it just goes back to normal or locks up. But that blinking dot has been there for 10 minutes before. Even in Realms of the Haunting, there's problems with slowdown. It's not very consistent. You can walk up and down the same passage and the system would perform differently each time. The best wording I can think of is that performance seems to come in lumps instead of being smooth, almost as if the system gets distracted and then remembers what it's meant to be doing. Now, I suppose it's entirely possible that that chipset, known for being problematic, really is getting distracted. We've no idea what goes on between it and the cache chips. They could just be lumps of plastic for all I know, though I doubt it. My suspicion is that occasionally, due to the nature of the cache and the asynchronous bus speed, that a cache miss occurs, where the cache fails to report an address that has been stored in it, or an instruction, and this means that all the instructions have to be run on the CPU again to catch up, which would cause delays like that. Windows 95 was out of the question, so the machine is running Windows 3.11, as much as I didn't want to. It does run, but I can't say much more for it. I did want to play old adventure games with this thing, but they tend to need CD-ROMs, and often things get corrupted when read from those. Realms of the Haunting I was lucky with, because I just had to copy the install directory from another machine, and it pretty much works. Broken Sword, none of these are Windows games by the way, I didn't even get that far, requires a 486 DX266 again, and it does recommend a Pentium 60, like what we have in here. It just ends up corrupt and most of the time doesn't run at all, and that's assuming it detects a CD drive when it does. That sucks, because I really like that game, and the timer goes nuts on some of the newer machines. It will run sometimes, but it'll inevitably go wrong, and it does run horribly. Here's Solex by Oxygen. Oxfab apparently worked on Uncharted for PS3, whatever that is. Either way, nice demo, and it supports a PAS. It runs surprisingly well for the most part. It slows down a little when it goes into wireframe, but I don't know what the system requirements are, and it is from 1996, so they might be a little high for the machine. Want to really hear what the PAS can do? Well, it turns out with a different driver than I used on the 586, I can squeeze just a little bit more out of it. Remember the Sound Blaster Pro 2 can only achieve just slightly higher than 22 kHz in stereo. Well, Pro Audio Spectrum Plus can do 48 kHz in stereo. Yeah, check that. That music's not the best example, but I've been trying to avoid copyright infringements since before the new copyright system, I might add. I made a video documenting my thoughts, and you probably wouldn't like them, but I'll upload it if enough people ask. Otherwise, I quite like my 3D Realms Media Blackout. As a last note on that though, we've got people complaining that they only have $7 in their wallet. Well, I'm £7 overdrawn at the time of making this, and you just bought 2 PS3s and 2 Xbox Ones, so you can go and fuck yourself. Notice they only complain about the money, these partner channels. I just do this shit because I want to, I don't make any money off of it. As a last note on the PAS, you can turn the volume down or up in Windows by pressing Ctrl-Alt-D and Ctrl-Alt-U respectively. The card also comes with a rather nice software suite. Also, it's entirely AdLib and Sound Blaster compatible, though it sounds different somehow, a bit like in Commander Keen. Thing is, I can't quite place my finger on what is different. I was going to run Descent on here, so here goes. Yeah, it's good, but I prefer Terminal Velocity. Too bad TRI recently closed. And if you haven't guessed, I can't remember what the keyboard controls are in Descent, and I don't care to. I'd use a joystick if I wanted to play it properly anyway. If it's not a bad game, I just find the controls a little bit difficult. All in all, that's about everything this box can do. It's frustrating because it has moments where you can tell the performance is there, but something's not working, it's letting the machine down big time, especially that BIOS. That's a real disappointment. As I cannot find the source of the problem, although I do think it is pretty much just a bad motherboard, I've no choice but to really dismantle it if I find a replacement at a good price. That probably won't get a video, as I'll just try to use another 586 and the configuration will be pretty much identical. I won't spend less than £50 on this whole thing. As for this motherboard, the man that sold me it did offer a return, and I never actually asked for one. He chased me up on eBay when I never left feedback. I've been too busy to send it back, so I'm stuck with it, but I can't really blame the seller for that. He did follow up what was wrong. He came and asked me, is everything fine, you can still send it back. He seems like a reputable guy. Last I saw, he had some of these motherboards left, and whilst I do think he is a good guy, I wouldn't recommend buying this model of motherboard from him for several reasons. Firstly, his dangerous battery mod. That is seriously a fire hazard, and you don't want toxic lithium and mercury all over the place. Believe me, that's a real problem. Secondly, he's priced it way too high. Thirdly, it's just a crap motherboard with an error-prone CPU. They are known for being quirky, these things. Just use a Pentium 75 and turn the memory timing or cache latency up, and maybe underclock it if you want something that performs like this. The early Pentiums really were a bad design. They had thermal problems, stability problems, and all manner of smaller issues. The Mercury 430LX chipset is well documented for being broken. Problems with cache memory, stability, corruption of data, generally sluggish performance for a hell of a lot of power consumption. It's even physically horrible to look at when you see the requirements of 4 separate plastic packages on the motherboard before it can actually work in some random mishmash layout, not to mention the stuff it interfaces with. The IDE controller's lumped somewhere between the PCI slots and the case, and it's already in a strange spot there, the PCI. If you wondered, no, I've no idea what the PCI IDE option does in the BIOS, as things work or not the same way regardless of the setting for that, and no, you can't install a PCI IDE card, because I tried and it doesn't work because the BIOS doesn't support option ROMs, and any attempts to disable the onboard IDE just makes it fail to pass post anyway. I've got a feeling that corruption by the onboard IDE controller might sometimes be caused by the fact that it's a very slow controller, about an hour to install Broken Sword, and I find less than a megabyte per second on write. There is an inbuilt sleep timer that can't be modified, and you hear the drive drop into low power mode and stay there until writing's complete and the controller decides to wake it up again at the next read. I imagine what's happening when it's still writing in this state is like trying to write to a CD at double the speed that's actually spinning. You'd get a very strange reproduction of the data, which would be unusable, I would imagine. As a rather quick afterthought, having run PC Check's diagnostics test, the video adapter seems to get thrown into monochrome mode, and the performance is very, very lacking, which is making me wonder if a lot of the performance is caused by some kind of bottleneck on the PCI bus somewhere. I mean, the cache tests out fine, although it does appear to be very, very slow. So maybe it's somewhere between there and the PCI, something doesn't work. I mean, as I said, these chipsets are known for being a little bit problematic, so I'll have to look into if there's a way around it, or if there's a BIOS for the board that's slightly better and would let me adjust wait states and things and potentially get around it. So yeah, that's just something I've noticed. Well, to summarise, not good, not good. Far from the worst machine I've had, but it's very hard to describe what it is with the performance. It's like it's there, but it just can't get it down properly. They were known for being iffy, so whilst it has the historical value of being an early Pentium, it comes with all of the horrible, like, fucking problems that they they came with. I don't know. It's going to end up as a display piece or sold or in a box somewhere, that, because I'm not having it. We're either going to put a 586 or that Pentium 75 board in there. That 75 board's a last resort because it's broken. Socket 7 boards are quite cheap though. I could probably get another one. Might even have a spare one actually. I don't think so, but I could look. Might be able to mend one. Yeah, so that shit aside, I've had enough of the thing already. Not good to use on a day-to-day basis. Wouldn't recommend one. Now, you remember me mentioning Twitch? Yes, I've had problems with them. Twitch can go fuck themselves. I cannot stream to Twitch now because of the shit they've done to their servers, and I've had arguments and fucking crap like that. So, yeah, I can't do Twitch now. I never did for this channel, but I've had some ideas because I've been poking about with it on behind the scenes. Hopefully, it didn't disturb anyone by doing this. You know, I dread think I'm filling people's inboxes and stuff with crap. If I have done, I sincerely apologise. It's beyond my control. I make mistakes like anyone else, and I can sort of get it working. They're a bit more lenient than Twitch, but if I can get it working, it'll start on my other channel where I'm just streaming games like I was on Twitch. But if I get it working, I thought, hey, maybe I can do a live stream on this channel. I can build a machine or overview one live. People can ask me shit in real time and make suggestions or whatever, you know. I don't know. Let me know what you think about it. I'm willing to try it. Either way, yeah, I've fucking had enough of this Pentium. So got a few things left to film for it, which you'll have already seen. So on my treason, I'm getting the fuck out of here because I've had enough. That, and I'm hungry. I want a fucking sandwich. I'd have to buy myself a Women's to make myself sandwiches for me. And just, oh, you make me a sandwich! Right, so no, I don't think I can afford that. But anyway, I'm out of here. Thanks for watching. I'm High Treason. I'll see you again soon. Without this Pentium, probably. Fucking thing. I really don't like it. I really don't. Yeah, thanks for watching.